Heights is one of the few neighborhoods in New York where you can walk down the street and feel like you're still in 1850, or at least imagine you are. There are over 600 historic buildings here, ranging from gorgeous Art Deco palazzos to stately brownstones to wooden colonials with front porches. And yet this neighborhood has evolved dramatically over the past 4.5 centuries since it first joined Kings County in 1683. Its shifts in fortune can be directly traced to often controversial urban infrastructure projects, and to the local residents who made their voices heard in support or resistance. In this video, we'll talk about the ferries, highways, and bridges and parks that threatened, bolstered, and indelibly shaped the development of the Brooklyn Heights you know today. My cousin Beth Connolly lives in Brooklyn Heights, so she and I will be your guides.
Let's start with a look at the neighborhood's position in New York City. Brooklyn Heights, zip code 11201, occupies about 1/3 of a square mile on Brooklyn's northwest shore. It is bounded in the north by Old Fulton Street, in the south by busy commercial corridor Atlantic Avenue, on the east by historic Cadman Plaza with its beautiful municipal buildings, and on the west by the East River. The neighborhood's location, just across from Lower Manhattan, has been the biggest factor driving its wealth and prominence since the beginning of New York City's history.
Now, at the dawn of the 19th century, New York had become one of the most important ports in the United States, playing a key role in the cotton trade between the American South and the United Kingdom. In 1825, the completion of the Erie Canal made New York City the most important trading city in the United States. If you live in Brooklyn, Fulton and Pierpont are familiar names to you, and they trace their origins back to this time period. Hezekiah Pierpont was one of the first landowners in the Heights. In addition to operating a gin distillery at the western end of Joralemon Street, he bought up as much local farmland as he could, and divided the land into residential lots in a grid format. In order to attract buyers for his plots, Pierpont turned to his friend Robert Fulton. In 1814, Fulton launched the Fulton Ferry Company with regular steam ferries to carry commuters across the East River, replacing the less predictable ferry boats, powered by sail, oar, or horse on a treadmill, that had been running since the 1630s. This quickly transformed Brooklyn Heights into an extremely desirable suburb for the merchant class to settle with their families. A flurry of development followed. At the turn of the 20th century, the neighborhood was transformed again by two major connectors to Manhattan, the Brooklyn Bridge and the subway. Many of the original residents chose to relocate further out into Brooklyn or back into Manhattan. As accessibility to the neighborhood increased, many historic mansions were torn down or converted into apartment buildings. Today, many of the neighborhood's 62,000 residents still commute to work in Manhattan. Brooklyn Heights is very well connected by the subway, with access to the 4, 5, 2, 3, R, A, and C trains all within a 10-minute walk at the Clark Street, Borough Hall, Court Street, and J Street stations. For most of these trains, Brooklyn Heights is the first stop after Manhattan. 96% of residents are white-collar workers with a median income of $124,000, almost twice the New York City median income of $63,000. Sadly, though, more than 10% are living below the poverty line.
Brooklyn Heights was the first neighborhood in New York City to be awarded the designation of Historic District in 1965 from the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission. Like most of the seismic changes in the neighborhood, this one resulted from the local residents fighting for it. When the city proposed destroying 7 acres of the neighborhood to erect a 20-story apartment building in 1959, locals formed the Community Conservation and Improvement Council, or CCIC, whose goal was to fight the destruction of the, quote, historic atmosphere of the Heights' quiet, secluded streets. They saw an opportunity to leverage New York State's little-known Bard Law for historic preservation. Around the same time, local architecture historian Clay Lancaster published his book, Old Brooklyn Heights, New York's First Suburb. He carefully documented the 619 historic homes in Brooklyn Heights, which gave CCIC the ammunition they needed to convince Mayor Wagner, who founded the Landmarks Preservation Commission in response, and awarded the Historic District designation in 1965. What's really cool is that since then, the LPC has gone on to grant landmark status to 31,000 buildings and 110 historic districts in New York City, which is an impact that the Heights organizers probably never even dreamed of. But because of their work, the majority of those 619 historic buildings are still standing today. They span a really wide range of architectural styles. Many people say that the oldest home in the Heights is at 24 Medaw Street, built somewhere between 1790 and 1830. It's a great example of a federal-style wood frame house. And another wooden frame house was actually built by Walt Whitman for his father, is at 64 Poplar Street. Of course, some of these historic homes are much less modest. For example, the 17,500 square foot Low Mansion on 3 Pierpont Place, built in 1857, which includes 15 bedrooms, 16 bathrooms, and 9,000 square feet of garden and outdoor space. The most famous church in Brooklyn Heights, and an example of the Italianate style, is Henry Ward Beecher's Plymouth Church, once known as the Grand Depot of the Underground Railroad. Beecher hid hundreds of slaves in the church's basement on their way to freedom. Truman Capote lived in an 1839 townhouse at 70 Willow Street, where he wrote Breakfast at Tiffany's and In Cold Blood. I think he really captured the vibe of this neighborhood when he said, quote, "These houses bespeak an age of able servants and solid fireside ease. Invoke specters of bearded seafaring father and bonneted stay-at-home wives, devoted parents to great broods of future bankers and fashionable brides." Personally, one of my favorite parts of Brooklyn Heights is how green it is. Most buildings are limited to 50 feet in height, and private yards display verdant trees and gardens. The neighborhood also enjoys unparalleled waterfront public space in the form of the Brooklyn Heights Promenade, an inadvertent gift that transformed private backyards into waterfront public space while saving the neighborhood's structure from a catastrophic Robert Moses highway plan. Moses, often known as New York's master builder, was responsible for the creation of 35 bridges, 12 highways, Lincoln Center, and countless housing projects in the mid-20th century in New York City and beyond. He is a controversial figure whose detractors say he ruthlessly prioritized development at all costs, ignoring neighborhood character, community needs, and historic preservation. Moses was plowing forward with development of the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway, or BQE, in the 1930s, laying a path that cut through other historic neighborhoods to the south, like Carroll Gardens and Red Hook. When he tried to do the same in Brooklyn Heights, though, the neighborhood's powerful residents united against the plan that would have divided it in half from Atlantic Avenue to Tillery. Brooklyn Heights residents lobbied for an alternative plan in which the highway would curve around the edge of the neighborhood. They offered Moses access to their backyards on Columbia Heights, overlooking the downtown skyline, to facilitate building a cantilevered highway on the side of the bluffs, which is the highway that we know today as the BQE. What they didn't know was that Moses was going to turn their private backyards into a public walkway. That's how the Brooklyn Heights Promenade was born, and it's attracted visitors ever since for its incredible views of sunsets over the downtown New York City skyline. In my opinion, though, the view of Lower Manhattan is even better from the piers at Brooklyn Bridge Park. And ever since I moved to Brooklyn Heights, I've been really curious about the history of this brand new park. If you are too, I recommend the book A History of Brooklyn Bridge Park by Nancy Webster and David Shirley. You will find that the full story of how this 85-acre urban oasis came to be is a collaboration between public entities, private developers, and community organizers that spanned decades. It began way back in the early 80s, at a time when the Brooklyn waterfront, once a vibrant shipping port, had degraded into a wasteland due to neglect and disuse. New York's Mayor Ed Koch called the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey to repurpose the piers. At that point, the Port Authority put in a call to the president of the Brooklyn Heights Association and asked him the shocking question, well, what do you think we should do? Taking that question to heart, the BHA began to investigate the matter. The neighborhood was concerned at the time about preserving views of the downtown skyline. To spoil a public view that is nothing less than a national treasure would seem unthinkable, wrote New York Times journalist Henrik Krogius in 1986. But it was a real threat as the Port Authority explored a plan to construct 30 residential buildings containing 2,500 apartments. Meanwhile, BHA worked with architects and residents on their own vision, called Harbor Park, that included playing fields, open space, a continuous walkway, and a hotel. The name Harbor Park eventually evolved to Brooklyn Bridge Park to capture the public's imagination. And in 1989, the community organization Brooklyn Bridge Park Coalition, now known as the Brooklyn Bridge Park Conservancy, was formed to fight for its creation. A big sticking point was whether the park could include housing. While many locals resisted the idea, fearing overcrowding, the Conservancy believed that it was necessary to keep the park self-sustaining well into its future. That vision succeeded, and today the park contains both residential and commercial space. The one Brooklyn Bridge Park condo is a repurposed 1928 warehouse. There are several other rental and condo buildings, as well as the one hotel, Brooklyn Bridge, the Empire Stores shopping center, and various eateries. All these businesses provide payments to the Brooklyn Bridge Park Corporation in lieu of property taxes, which gives the park the remarkable designation of being financially self-sustaining. In 2010, after decades of planning and negotiation among countless stakeholders, the park began opening to the public. It continues to be under construction, and it's been opening in phases, with the most recent section opened in winter 2021. The park contains 6 piers, basketball courts, a soccer field, walking paths, native plantings, coffee shops, restaurants, 1 floating, biking and running paths, grills and picnic areas, playgrounds, a sandy beach, a carousel, and plenty of grassy stretches to spread out on a blanket. Some of the design risks taken haven't paid off, though. Picturesque Squibb Bridge connects Brooklyn Bridge Park with the Brooklyn Heights Promenade. The original design by Genius Grant recipient Ted Zolli was intended to bounce, but visitors and city officials found it too bouncy. After $4 million in initial building costs and a $3 million attempt to repair it, the bridge had to be demolished and completely rebuilt for another $7 million. But it's recently reopened, and it's a very popular way to get down to the park. I do think what I love most about Brooklyn Bridge Park is its landscape design. The park's landscape architect, Michael Van Valkenburg Associates, described their design philosophy in this way. Guided by the concept of post-industrial nature, the design uses unabashedly man-made landscapes to kickstart new site ecologies that can thrive and evolve in a heavy-use urban setting. Even so, when you're in the middle of a field of wildflowers in the pier in the middle of the East River, you can almost forget you're in a city until you look out at the steel skyscrapers across the river.
We hope you learned something about Brooklyn Heights and New York City history in this video. If you did, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Leave a comment below to let us know if we missed anything and what you'd like to learn about more in the next video.
We'll leave you with a few local favorites. Ella Crown Cookies, Della Rocco's and Luzzo's Pizza, Elsa for cocktails, Swallow Cafe for coffee, and Noodle Pudding and River Deli for Italian food. We'll end with a few lines from Walt Whitman, from his poem, Crossing Brooklyn Ferry. What is it then between us? What is the count of the scores of hundreds of years between us? Whatever it is, it avails not, distance avails not, and place avails not. I too lived. Brooklyn of ample hills was mine.